أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome on Youth Matters with me, your host, Sakina Habib. I hope that all of you are keeping in good health, inshallah, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep you safe as always. Now, today's topic is a very important topic and it's a very serious issue that needs to be discussed. On Friday, 4th March, a Shia mosque in Peshawar was rocked by a suicide bomb, which left at least 58 people dead. The terror outfit Islamic State have since claimed responsibility for the massacre. Though the Shia community in Pakistan has faced such violence for decades, incidents such as these are often blamed on external enemies which have nothing to do with Pakistan. And by ascribing them to faceless foreign conspirators are used to obscure the day-to-day lived reality of Shias in the country and the pervasiveness of prejudice faced by members of the community at a more everyday level. Then we also see another headline on Sunday, March 13, 2022, when the Saudi regime beheaded 40 Shia youth, in total 81 with the others. And these youths were mostly students and devotees of Ayatollah Sheikh Nimr. Now look at this image, which will be displayed on the screen. How is it that the same oppression is shown in a different light, whereas the other seems to be ignored? The Ukrainian hospital bombing increases heat on US and allies to do more to stop Russia versus the US bombing of Afghanistan hospital not being a war crime. So today our discussion will highlight the systematic bigotry and prejudice faced by the Shia community and how it is a regular and deeply embedded facet of their lives. While the worst forms of violence make the headlines, the more subtle aggressions and acts of cruelty continue to be seen only by those who have to routinely face up to them. To carry on with today's discussion, I am joined by the Muslim counselor, registered psychotherapist Barak Hussain, to share her expertise of knowledge and explain what type of mental health effects does this have for, number one, being a Shia, living as a Shia in this day and age and struggling to keep up with your faith. Number two, being able to balance your faith respectfully with brothers and sisters of different faiths. And number three, the mental trauma that victims go through in war zone situations. We'll be having a very brief conversation for today. And without much further ado, I would like to say salam to my sister Barak. Salam alaikum, Sister Barak. Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you doing?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I wish we were not talking about this topic, but it's something that is out of our hands and definitely something we need to address, inshallah. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, I'm very well. Thank you so much for taking out your precious time and joining me. Sister Barak, the first question that I would like to ask you is that, when we read these headlines, all of us as an audience, what could happen psychologically in general to the public when, we see such haunting headlines?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When you see something that is very impactful it can hurt you in this manner, meaning that it's very traumatic. Those people, let's say, who have lived in war-torn countries before or have witnessed violence, whether it's violence in the home or it's violence in the neighborhood, and like I said, especially those who have witnessed war-like scenarios, and in the last few years it's been nonstop, one country after another, one area after another. You see people all of a sudden become refugees, and they're either welcomed or not welcomed because of their race, their religion, or creed, and who they belong to. And it's very disturbing, to say the least, right? So the impact of trauma can re-trigger past trauma. And I've seen that a lot of people some of my close friends who've lived in Lebanon, for example, and witnessed the wars years back and then immigrated to Canada and as refugees and then grew up here. When they they described to me how they seem to be excuse me. Please edit that part
Alhamdulillah,
out.
bless you. No
Alhamdulillah.
problem.
Bless you too. So one of my close friends, and I've seen this firsthand through her experience, when she grew up in Lebanon in a very war-torn area and immigrating to Canada as a refugee, I recall when she talks about difficult situations, or when we discuss difficult situations around her, it doesn't impact her as much because she describes to me how, I'm going to be a little bit graphic here, but what she's seen blown up bodies in front of her. So when these problems here in our first world lives are discussed, they don't really impact her that much because of the trauma
Yeah.
she witnessed as a child growing up. So you see how when you put into perspective that way, it puts things into perspective for you. I recall I was in Iraq in the year 2002, right before the war that happened into the beginning of 2003. And I recall that I was swiftly taken out of Iraq at that time because my family was terrified of what's going to happen and they did not want me to be around there. So coming back to Canada, I recall the trauma I personally experienced is watching, and I'm sure a lot of people experience this too, watching Iraq being bombed, and it was recorded live on TV and we could watch that. And so staying up nights and just watching and not knowing what was happening to our family, if they were dead or alive, or our country people, that in itself
Yeah.
created some sort of trauma. I recall within myself, although I was not physically there. So I could relate to a lot of people who, let's say, who are living in that area, although it's a different experience, it stays on you, like it stays in you, the impact of it. So people, let's say, who have never experienced such trauma and see the headlines of what's happening today, they either can be very impacted by it and have empathy and compassion for those who are hurt and their lives are destroyed, and the children and women and elderly, are their lives are being impacted. It either will impact them and elicit a response where they of pain towards them, or perhaps advocacy or sharing the news, because we see also that the news is very biased and censored. It chooses to show what it wants, and we'll get into details a little bit more with that. However, we have a responsibility as well when we see that the news is not being shared and we have access to information to share that information. So that could be one response. Another could be that people can be apathetic, meaning they don't care because it's not related to them. I remember last year was interviewed by the Ottawa Citizen and a local newspaper where we were talking about how, or a few years before, I don't remember. No, was it last year? Yes, it was during the pandemic, and so the reporter was researching and engaging with the topic of what happens over there and how it impacts us here. Is the media, the Canadian media, covering important topics that impact people of color or creed or faith? And the reality was that it wasn't. It wasn't, because people here are so like far reached from what is happening in those parts of the world that they don't see it as something that's impacting their lives here. They're just going about their lives as though nothing is happening, when in reality, people are being murdered and killed because of their faith, because of their skin color, because of whatever reason that is very different from, let's say, the first world privileged lives of people who don't have relatives back in those countries or friends. You can see how individuals who do have friends and families and who have close ties and national pride back to their country and homeland and their people will be impacted heavily. They will be upset. They'll be hard to focus when we get down to the actual mental impact. They won't be able to focus. They won't be able to sleep properly, eat. They won't be able to function properly in their work as well. So this is something to be really aware of in terms of these are normal common responses that could happen when you are triggered or for the first time see something like this. I think it's human nature, to say the least, to show your humanity, that you respond to the pain of another. And all from an Islamic perspective, we know the prophetic hadith, which I'm paraphrasing here, is that when your part of your body is hurt, the other feels it. And this is what the Muslim ummah is towards each other. When one part is hurt, the other feels it.
Yes, indeed. Indeed, yeah, you're very right. And I think your hadith like applies to everybody, because there are some people. I'm just what you say, transitioning to another topic of what's going on in Ukraine right now, for example, and so many Muslims question that whether we should be helping Ukraine or not. And what you just mentioned right now really applies very well. That we should, of course.
Humanity.
Why not? It's humanity, exactly. Now, Sister Barak, uh, when we talk about an impact that an individual can have, what type of an impact can an individual have being in the minority category?
This is something interesting where sometimes people feel helpless and hopeless to do anything. They don't believe that they can actually have an impact on something as big as a war or attack on a place. And I don't believe that we don't. I do believe we have some kind of efficacy to create waves, to create impact. So for example, you here in this part of the world can write to your local member of parliament here in Canada, for example. And this is something that we do in terms of lobbying. You can have protests, but there's more impact with lobbying when you get politicians involved, the ones that
Mhm.
you voted into office to care about your voices, so to speak, right? So this is something that you can definitely do. You can have social media campaigns, and we can see the impact of social media, how it has overturned nations, right? So
Yeah.
don't ever think that you don't have the ability or the power. You do. You have a voice, use it. You have a hand, use it. Write, type. You have social media influence, use it for the good of bringing attention and awareness. I mean, just look what happened over the summer, what happened in Palestine. The ongoing protests that took place worldwide did not stop. They stopped eventually, but there was a momentum that was taking place through social media that was scaring the enemy, so to speak, in terms of that people were actually making an impact. And even though the media censored or did not share, there was a wave of social media advocacy where people were throwing out there what was going on, and it just picked up where the main media had to mention it, where people in this part of the world could not ignore it anymore, where Hollywood celebrities were opening up to this. And so it did take an impact, because this is through the impact of what you can do. So I absolutely believe that, especially when you are around like-minded people and you are empowering and supporting each other, we don't have the same, rather back then, before the impact of social media, we did not have the same impact as we do today. I don't think that we did back then. Now news cannot be hidden, true media news, right? Back then, it's what was presented on the TV stations and the newspaper. But when the internet came along and then social media took over, people go to Facebook for news or TikTok or wherever now. They don't go to the main media outlets anymore. This is where you have an impact and power to use your voice, to use your beliefs, and use your skills and abilities and talents to put the news out there and create those waves. So an individual absolutely has the power to change in the world with what they hope to see, right? But first you have to believe that you do, and second, look at how you can do it. Look at your resources, look at your skills, abilities, talents. A little sidetrack here. I was working with a group yesterday from London, um, England, and we were talking about how to reach your full potential and how to make impact and how to serve the Imam of your time. And if you think about it, if you can use all your talents, your skills, and abilities and direct it towards the goal of, yes, this is my career, this is my life, but towards the one goal of serving the Imam of your time, submission to God, then look at how powerful that goal is, right? But look at what you have to do to get to that goal. Same thing here. An individual, if you can align your resources, your talents, your skills, your abilities, your passion, and everyone around you towards that goal, you can have a lot of impact. So never doubt, believe in the ability that creating the waves to change things in the world. Absolutely.
Yeah, I very much agree with what you've mentioned. And just to add to furthermore to the point about being in the minority category, I think it's not just to do with religion. Sometimes it's also to do with someone's status. For example, if someone comes from a poor background, or if someone is probably uneducated, probably didn't get enough education in their lives, sometimes because of their skin color, as you mentioned, because of all these factors, they feel inferior, and then there's that inferiority complex that comes in the picture. And I feel like, I mean, I believe that, it affects one's mind so much that they don't feel confident even to hang around with certain group of people, because that inferiority complex has been created within. So, what do you think? Like, what are some of the steps that can be taken in order to, bring to help boost their self-esteem?
So we know the impact of racism on mental health. For example, we need to understand, first of all, what is racism, right? And it's
Mhm.
really it's a sign and a lack of psychological integration, so a lack of self-esteem and inner security. So psychologically
Mhm.
healthy people with a stable sense of self and strong inner security are not racist, so because they have no need to strengthen their sense of self through that group identity, right? They have no need to define themselves in distinction to and in conflict with others, right? So we take a look at racism, xenophobia, which is in this context of the dislike or prejudice against people from other countries. They are not only possible responses to insecurity or sense of lacking, um, of course. So it has to do with becoming obsessively materialistic or ambitious responses. So, for example, psychologically healthy people, they don't need to resort to racism in the same way, right? And we see there's a lot of studies shown where there's an insignificant negative effect on both the physical and the mental health outcomes for people who are being attacked that way, right? So there's
Mhm.
anxiety, there's anger, sadness that arises in an understandable reaction uh, during the impact or the wake of these racist experiences, right? So it's that perception. So the person at the other end of it feels a lack of control. There's a lot of
Mhm.
internalization, which means they are looking inwards and lowering, rather having low thoughts and negative self-talk about themselves because of what the other is putting on them. Avoidance of valued action, meaning because of the inferiority complex that is pushed upon them or is a response to racism, they avoid doing important for example, finding meaningful ways to live their lives, whether it means pursuing education or finding, high career jobs or anything like that. People are passed up for jobs, and they don't take it. They don't get over it. They take it very personally because of their, let's say, race and so on and so forth. So you see right there, because I can't answer that question there without giving this a little bit of background, right, to understand that. So understanding that anxiety and physiologically as well, there's like elevated heart rate, blood pressure, and if you just look at the news and you see what's happening, for example, in the news today, what happened, the bigotry that's going on and the hypocrisy with how the
Mhm.
refugees are being treated in Ukraine versus the Syrian refugees, the Iraqi refugees, or any other place in the last few years, that doesn't that boil your blood? The expression goes, that's because your blood pressure and heart rate's being increased, right? And there's all this like negative self-focused talk on what, are we not good enough? Are we not worthy enough? Why were we treated this way? Why were these people treated this way? Oh, because they're Muslim, or because they're not skin color, or they're not blonde and blue-eyed, or they're uncivilized, like what we've heard the rhetoric in the media is. It's appalling. So when we hear this, when we see this type of blatant hypocritical racism, you say, what steps do we take to avoid this prejudice? I mean, the reality is, first, we have to acknowledge that it's happening. Those who are doing it, um, there needs to be this, what's the word that I'm looking for? It just slipped my mind. Oh, it just slipped my cancel culture. There it is. Cancel, because we have the power to create this cancel culture on people who are using such awful terminology. Right. So again, this comes back to the power that we have to change the rhetoric in the media, and people who are absolutely ignorant and racist need to be called out on it. So our steps, first of all, you feel that outrage and you physiologically respond and mentally respond. Just the outrage itself and causing an uproar is not enough. You need to be strategic about how you tackle it. And so you see a lot, for example, of Muslims, like my friend Zainab Merchant and Fatima. They have been working on the Muslim journals, the Muslim
I've
journalists, and
seen
so
that.
they've been
They're doing
they've been
amazing.
issues in a very strategically critical thinking manner, where they were tackling the issue in a manner rather than you see crowds raging and screaming, right? The typical Muslim response that the media portrays of us. You have these intellectual discussions, tackling the issue, calling people out, and holding them accountable. And sometimes you feel you're at the losing end of it, but don't ever doubt who you are and your power. And if we're being specific at our topic today as Shias, don't forget who you are the followers of, the descendants of whom you are, right? And this is the lonely path, following the truth. We know this in our hadith, right? So it may be a lonely path when you're upholding the truth like that, but there's also a lot of others upholding that truth with you. So we need to learn how to work together and put our pride aside, put our differences aside when we talk about these steps, because there's a lot of disunity in the Muslim ummah and in the Shia
Yes.
ummah specifically as well. And that's common and normal. I mean, you find that in any group, really. It's not just our community, that we're talking specifically about our community right now. So the reality is there is that, just like any other community. And so, I mean, you have that in a family, right? So you start at the family unit and then you grow into the society and the community and the ummah at large. And so how do you even begin to work on that? Well, when we talk about these steps, we have to, it's not a simple answer. We have to look at it at the micro level, because this is a macro question, but we need to break it down at that micro level individually. How do we work together? How do we put our differences aside, or pride aside, right? To be able to work together for a cause, for a common goal. And so right now, I think a lot of Muslims, whether we're Shia or Sunni, we felt the backlash of being called uncivilized, or not blonde and blue-eyed, and not worthy of getting help, and not getting the compassion and sympathy that Muslims deserve, or any person outside of what Ukraine is symbolizing to the West right now. You're human. You deserve that compassion. You deserve to have that open arm, support, and love, no matter who you are, right? So there needs to be that significant basic reflection of thinking about how we view ourselves and how we view the others, but not as others. And that's part of when we look at racism, and how we look at the basics of how, when we think of the other, we feel that, we're displaced from them. We're not connected to them. Therefore, they deserve to get whatever happens to them that is bad. As soon as you look at the other as a mother like your mother, a sister like your sister, a brother like your brother, a father like your father, a child like your child, a relative like your relative, you're making that human connection. You're not disconnecting yourself. You feel like them, you bleed like them, your blood is the same color as them. You're human in the end, right? So when we go back to that basic thought, this is where we can start. Because as soon as you realize that you're all brothers in humanity, like Imam Ali says, alayhi salam, then it's no longer the others. You care for this person like you would for your own. So to answer this again, I can't give a big, long-winded answer other than this simple concept. If you can look at the other as your own, I think that's where we can start. And then it just naturally falls into place after that. I think my answer is very idealistic, and also perhaps speaking in terms of like a utopic world, which, unfortunately is hard to get to. And this is where, as Shia Muslims, we believe that this justice will come to the world when the Imam of our time reappears, right? This is that utopic world that we can get to with the justices that will be implemented. Is it happening now? Absolutely not. Which is why, as hopeful as I am in the nature of humankind, in terms of it being a good one, which is the Islamic perspective, there is still so much evil in the world. And it's hard to get to that place of seeing the other as our own, when there's so much hatred, there's so much fear, there's so much superiority over others in terms of mentality, right? So there's so much to break down and decipher here. Bottom line, If you could see the other as your own, I think that's a good start and step towards that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think you've clarified the point very clearly of how we can take certain steps to avoid this prejudice and, bring things more into peace and harmony so that the world can accept diversity. Now, I'm going to draw your attention and, of course, all of the viewers' attention to a very sensitive issue, and that is that if we look at Saudi Arabia, for example, it is a holy land, and this is a land where our Aimas were born as well. But unfortunately, to maintain our faith particularly is very difficult because we have to be in taqiyya full time, and when we look at that Shia community, and when we look at the generations that will be coming on, why is it that the Shia community is attacked to date, and what kind of effects does this have on the current generation? In such a situation, especially the way I give the example of people who live in Saudi Arabia and they are Shias.
So again, I think there's a lot of different ways to answer this. When we look at it from a psychological and mental health perspective, it's again that attitude of the others being superior, right? Like being superior to this group, right? And again, there's a lot to unpack here when we take a look at it. Shia history and Islamic history. I'm just going to give the basics. We know our history, and those who don't, please go educate yourself, read, ask those who know, right? Essentially, it's a matter of power. It came down back then in history, a matter of power, that these people believed they were above and better what the prophet had decreed in terms of who was going to be the leader after him. And so the others felt that they were in the right. They wanted that power. They wanted that position. So again, I'm looking at it from a psychological, historical perspective here, that because they wanted to stay in power, or be in power, they disregarded what the prophet had said, and which was historically witnessed by some accounts of over 300,000 people in the last Hajj of the prophet, the pilgrimage of the prophet, which was his only pilgrimage, where we saw in Ghadir Khum what the last ayah of the Quran decreed upon. So, I mean, this is not opinion, this is fact. And it's both from Sunni and Shia sources. So again, so this is the basics. Those who are not familiar, please go look it up, read. That essentially what we see here is that there's a group of people who were not happy with what the prophet said, and that they wanted to create their own regime of power. And this was exactly what happened after the prophet's death. Again, this is fact, not opinion, that they were the ones who said, we are going to be the ones in power. We're going to decide who's going to be in power. So you see the human nature of greed here, and that takabbur of wanting to seize power. Some people have that tendency in their nature to lean towards that for the dunya, for the materialistic aspects of this world. So I mean, you can psychoanalyze this. It's very clear what's going on here. So this took place back 1400 years ago. And so, and if you read about Islamic history, and specifically Shia history, they were persecuted. The Ahl al-Bayt, the Imams of the Ahl al-Bayt were persecuted in each of the Khalifas of the time, okay, where they were either buried under bridges, they were either, killed at birth, or they either poisoned. Like this is the family descendants of the prophet. Like if you look at the history of Baghdad and Kalamiya and some of the bridges in Iraq and Baghdad, there were sayyids that were buried alive in these buildings and bridges. And it just shows you the animosity towards the household of the prophet. This is the descendants, the Sayyid. So imagine the Imams, which we know how they were either poisoned or slain, right? So because they were seen as a threat to the Khalifa at the time, again, psychologically here, it's fascinating to see how people want to keep the power. And there's also an interesting aspect at that time, and I was reading a lot about this because I found it so interesting, the tribal mentality. So it's again the superiority of this tribe over this tribe. And so even within the tribe of Quraysh, where the household of the Prophet, they're all from the same tribe, they're all from the same family. If you know the story of Shimr, la'natullah alayhi, he was related to Abu Fadl al-Abbas's Ashira tribe, right? So it's they're all interlinked, they're all cousins of each other, but then there's the superiority of, these, and go back even Jahiliyyah. And if you read about the story of the history of the prophets and how he slowly had believers following him, so they were believing in polytheism. They did not believe in monotheism, and the prophet brought the story and the belief of that, and so they were threatened. They did not want that. And so, like I said, if you go back then and continue onwards, then you see the hatred towards the prophet and his family, even though they were outwardly Muslim, right? They presented themselves as Muslim to be accepted, because the majority became Muslim after, right? So again, it's psychological. If you see here, historically, it was about hate and resentment, and they kept it. That's why they're called the munafiqun in the Quran, the hypocrites. They inside one thing and outside another, right? So you see psychologically how this over time, through right after the Prophet's death, what happened with Imam Ali and the others, and it continued on through Karbala and beyond, and to the other descendants of the household of the Prophet, the Imams and so on. So, okay, so this is a little bit of psychological, historical context here. Now we can look at today. Because we are the lovers and followers of this household and what the Prophet asked of us to love through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a lot of animosity and hatred towards our love for them, because they believe they're the ones in the right, and of course we believe we are the ones in the right, right? But we are taught by the Ahl al how to interact with people who hate, how to interact with people who are trying to hurt us. And it's very important to understand this, because a lot of people tend to have animosity back, aggression back. And sometimes you have to stand up, and we are taught these akhlaq. Sometimes you have to stand up, but we are taught how to stand up through your voice, through justified anger, but not through violence and action. And you see that through Imam Ali alayhi salam, with his most simple example of how when he was in battle and his enemy spit on him, what did he do? And this is psychologically amazing. He held his ghaith, his anger. He stepped back. He calmed himself down, his anger. And then he came back and fought the enemy until he died, until he killed him. He was asked after, what did he do? And he said, because had I killed him in that moment, I would have done it from my own anger. Whereas I took a step back, realigned myself, meditated, and mindfully connected myself to God. Of course, I'm paraphrasing, but psychologically, I'm interpreting this act where he realized his goal of why he must do this. And it's not for his own personal gain and needs of that satisfaction of hurting someone who spat on him and disrespected him and insulted him, because this is how Muslims tend to act these days. Oh, so insulted, they're burning the Quran, let's go attack and kill them. No. Look what the Imam did. He held his anger back, realigned himself as to why he's doing this, and then completed what he had to do. And it was for God, not for his own not selfish, but for his own personal needs. So if we take a look at this straight up, there's a hatred towards Shia because, first and foremost, fear, lack of knowledge. They're being brainwashed to hate. A lot of Sunnis who came to Shia Islam, including Wahhabis, which is the extreme form of Sunni Islam, and even the Sunnis don't acknowledge them, by the way. A lot of Sunnis scholars do not acknowledge Wahhabism as a school of thought because of how against Islam. And this is where you see ISIS come from. The likes of Yazid and Muawiyah and Abu Sufyan, their descendants are ISIS, enemies that hate humanity, love and hate peace. Again, I'm looking from a psychological, historical perspective here. And so when you apply it to the Shias today, you see where this all lines in now. Because of our love for the Prophet and his household, the way that we were asked to love them, they hate because of that, right? Again, lack of knowledge, power, right? This is where the money is. This is where the life is, so to speak. And again, coming back to that point of reverts or converts, they themselves said, we didn't understand why there's so much hate. We didn't understand why you prayed on a rock, or rather prayed to the rock, right? That's the language. We don't know why you don't put your hands up like this when you pray. We don't know why you curse the other people. We don't know why, you worship Ali. And so when a lot of intellectual and critical thinking people will find these things very basic and idiotic. And then when they want to learn the truth, they dig deeper and they start reading books like Then I Was Guided by Sheikh Muhammad Tijani, or Ask Those Who Know, or Peshawar Nights, or all of these books, and Muraja'at, famous scholarly uh, book of letters between a Shia and a Sunni scholar, where the Shia scholar will take proof from Sunni books to prove his points to a Sunni scholar. It's an excellent book. I remember reading it back in university when I was challenged by Sunnis in terms of looking at who we are and why we are and why we love Imam Hussain and why they hate us so much and why they consider us kafir and so on and so forth. Because all of a sudden you're an other. You are an other because you pray to a rock, you worship Ali, and you beat yourself in chains for Hussein. And it sounds very cult-like if you think about it that way. But then when you're a critical thinker and an intellectual, right, you start asking the right questions and you will come down to answers. I'm also explaining this from a personal experience, a lived experience, where I saw a lot of my Sunni friends in university came to Shia Islam, or they were not even Muslim to begin with. They were converts and reverts. And so they came to Shia Islam through truth and love. And when they heard people telling them, don't pray with her, she's Shia, she's not good for you, one of my friends said, this made me question things more as to why. And so she discovered the truth and her love for Ali Muhammad on her own, subhanAllah. So it's interesting, the more hatred, the more push. When you are able to interact with somebody at the intellectual level and the emotions after, because emotions sometimes close down our intellect, right? The part of the brain that works with intellect, the amygdala, when it's emotionally charged, it flashes like this. You can't think straight. The hippocampus and all that. So that all of that you need to kind of bring it down, calm down, and then you can think critically. And if you can get somebody with the critical thinking, then you can work with emotions. When you talk about the story of Imam Hussain, salamullah alayhi, and you talk about Sayyidah Fatima, salamullah alayha, which, by the way, for example, Sheikh Vinay, he was of Hindu background, and I remember chatting with him the other day when he came to Ottawa, and he said that it was Qadiyat Fatima to Zahra that got him to come to Islam to begin with, in Shia Islam. So when you catch someone at that level and you're talking about the tragedy of Karbala and what it stood for in terms of all humanity, I think this is where you can get to people to understand, rather than looking at, say, some extreme Shias who go beyond and above and show Islam and Shia Islam in a negative way. Let's be truthful, right? But when you get down to the basics and talking about that, I think it does get to people. And we look at who is Hussein, for example. We look at the blood drives that we're doing, or the amazing charity work that who is Hussein is doing. You see how it impacts people and humanity in general. So we have a lot of work to do as Muslim Shias, and not to be down or, let's say, demotivated when you see how much there's hatred and anger towards you. And it's so hard. I understand. It's so hard when you see these bloody attacks on you for your beliefs and who you are. For example, in Saudi, in Kuwait, and recently in Pakistan, and a few months before in Afghanistan. It is heart-wrenching, right? It is heart-wrenching. But we also know from the Ruwayat that the lovers of Ali Muhammad will always be persecuted.
Yes.
And no matter what they do to us, we will always harbor that love. There's a burning love in our hearts that will never die, right? That will never die. We know this. And so this is something that terrifies the others, the people in power. When they see the yaqeen and the sincerity and the strength that true Muslim Shias have, or just Muslims in general, that terrifies the enemy, because you see, and I have to word this very carefully, that we are willing to sacrifice our lives for these ideals, and not in the psychotically sick, deprived way that you see through ISIS, because they are killing other people. What I'm saying here is that we will give ourselves up for these ideals, not to hurt people, but to show people love for these ideals. You see the difference? The others that are attacking Shias and others who are hurting humanity, they are killing and murdering through hate and giving up their
Yeah.
lives through hate. So where you see with the proper, and in all humans, not just Muslims, specifically Shias, when you are sacrificing your life and you're willing to die for love of God, that's different. You love God so much, and what He has taught us through that humanity and connecting with each other. You see a lot of non-Muslims in history, they died for these ideals, not by hurting others, but by believing in their beliefs and sticking to their beliefs. That's love. That's conviction. That's yaqeen, that is strength. That is honor. That is dignity. And is what we learn from Imam Hussain, right? It is better to die in dignity than to live in humiliation. This is what we talk about, ideals, standing up and sticking to your beliefs. And this is love and dedication as well. So you see the difference here. And that's why I said I have to choose these words very carefully, because they can be easily misunderstood and twisted. No, this is through hate and anger and greed of this world and power and the need to hurt others. Whereas this, I am willing to stand up for my beliefs no matter what it is, and stand up strong. And so the Shias, any minority that is being targeted and persecuted this way, there's going to be a toll. There's going to be casualties. There's going to be sacrifice. In the end, it's you and your ideals. What do you choose to stand up for? And again, like I said, this is not just the Shia minorities, any minority that is being persecuted. Look what happened in Rwanda. Look at what happened to the Rohingya Muslims, for example. Look at what's happening. Well, even right now, like, I don't know much about the politics of Ukraine and Russia, but definitely Russia's bigger than the Ukraine, right? And you see what's happening there. But then there's so much within there right now that we're seeing the true face of racism in these parts of the world, right? Because of this minority that's being attacked. Anyhow, we can go on, but I think we got the gist of the idea here in terms of, what are you going to do to stand up for your beliefs, and beliefs when it comes to love, when it comes to God, when it comes to truth, not when it comes to wanting to hurt others for the sake of you feeling good about yourself.
Thank you so much, Sister Barak. Mashallah, you have really, outlined all the points very clearly, very explicitly. And I think the message is conveyed very clearly because, mashallah, even the hadith that many hadith that you incorporated really makes a lot of sense. And, we really should learn a lot from the knowledge that you have shared with us. I really thank you for joining me on today's program. And I know that this was a very sensitive and a very heavy topic, but I think you've really managed to highlight the key points. And I think that
Inshallah.
the message, yes, is very much understood by the audience that, at the end of the day, we owe so much to Imam Hussain alayhi salam. He sacrificed his life for us,
Ideals.
basically. So,
Yeah. For
we
humanity,
owe.
for humanity, for standing up against justice. And this message transcends just Shia. This is a universal message that we all can connect with. And when we're thinking about, again, I'm speaking from a psychological lens when I look at this. This is not just about Shias. This is not just about this or that. This comes down back to humanity. And when we talk about Imam Hussain and when we talk about the plight of the Shias, it is a universal message that transcends just Shiism. It is something that we can all connect with as humans, right? Now, when it comes back to being Shia, be proud of who you are and what you believe and what you are following, but in a humble way. You have a lot of people walking around with Sif Imam Ali on, their chest here, they're wearing it, but their akhlaq is completely against. They don't even know what it stands for example, right? that whether it's hijab or modesty or akhlaq, manners, charity, helping, love, what's the point of identifying yourself as such, right? And connecting yourself to such an identity if you're not honoring who the Ahlul Bayt were and what they stood for and sending that message across. So that's something to think about as well, because I know we didn't really talk about that part of our Shia identity. It's definitely something to be have pride in and be proud of. And this is something that's encouraged in our faith, in terms of our faith and who we are, but not in a way where it's arrogant and then you get to the attitude of the others and then better and superiority over others, where we get into racism and so on and so forth. So just to as a final thought, to of course we're very proud of who we are, but this pride has to be put into action properly, that is in proportional equivalence to the words that we're putting out there or the show that we're putting out there, right? Essentially,
Right.
because we didn't really touch much upon that. I just wanted to put that in there. And thank you for exploring this topic. I think it's important that we delve into deep topics like that. And again, forgive me for any what's the word I'm looking for? I'm basing a lot of what I'm saying from the perspective of psychology and from what I've seen with people and these experiences, what I'm seeing in the media, and I'm seeing how it's affecting people at a personal level, right? So when we have this resentment, answer it with love, because people are not there. There's a lot of power and superiority and fear and lack of understanding. So when you see people responding in that hate, yes, we take a stance, but we also have to respond with love. Last thought, final thought.
Thank you. Thank you. I really thank you. Jazakallah khairan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of our efforts, and especially in this beautiful month of Sha'ban. And let us just pray for all the people around the world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasten the reappearance of Imam Zamana Ajlallah ta'ala Farajul Sharif, that he may bring justice to the world, and all this evil should come to an end, inshallah. I thank you, sister.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much. Jazakallah khairan.
Wa iyaakum. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much for tuning in on today's program. And this was a very important topic that I think had to be explored. And I think Sister Bara really did justice to today's episode. She's really highlighted some very crucial points. And I think that all of us, including myself, should really ponder into this topic. And, we should really stand up for our rights, the way she mentioned very clearly. Thank you so much for joining on today's episode, and stay tuned for another episode next week, inshallah. And please do let me know how do you find my episodes, and what other topics would you like me to explore. Thank you. Jazakumullah khairan. This is your host, Sakina Habib, signing off. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.